The crystal vase shattered against the marble floor, and that's when Marcus realized his mistake. His pregnant wife, Sienna, stood in the doorway of their penthouse living room, her 8-month belly prominent beneath her silk robe, her dark eyes fixed on the woman draped across their Italian leather sofa. The mistress, a light-skinned woman named Amber with honey-blonde hair and too much perfume, smirked as she adjusted a designer dress, making no effort to hide the hickey on her neck. Marcus had brought her home. To their home. The billionaire tech mogul had grown so comfortable in his arrogance, so certain of his control, that he'd crossed a line he could never uncross. If you're watching this, hit that subscribe button right now, because what happens next will leave you speechless. Sienna didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply stood there, her hand resting protectively on her belly, breathing slowly through her nose like she was counting. Marcus watched his wife's face, expecting tears, expecting her to crumble the way she always did when they argued about his late nights and suspicious phone calls. But something was different this time. Something in her eyes had shifted, hardened, like she'd finally made a decision she'd been putting off for too long. "Baby, listen," Marcus started, rising from the armchair where he'd been watching Amber make herself comfortable. His 6'3" frame, usually so imposing in boardrooms and business deals, suddenly felt inadequate under his wife's steady gaze. He was wearing his favorite Tom Ford suit, the one Sienna had bought him for their 5th anniversary, and the irony of that wasn't lost on him. It's not what you think. Amber just needed a place to crash for the night. Her apartment got flooded. The lie came easily, too easily, the same way all his lies had come for the past 2 years. He'd underestimated his wife for so long, treated her like she was too soft, too naive, too busy with her pregnancy to notice his affairs. Sienna had given up her career as a financial analyst when they got married, per his request, and he convinced himself that made her dependent, weak, unable to survive without him. He provided everything. The penthouse overlooking downtown Atlanta, the designer clothes, the luxury cars, the unlimited credit cards. In his mind, that gave him the right to do whatever he wanted. Amber giggled from the sofa, crossing her long legs deliberately. "Marcus, baby, you don't have to lie anymore. She's gonna find out eventually." The mistress had been emboldened by months of secret hotel rooms and expensive gifts, convinced that Marcus would choose her over his wife. She'd been pushing for this confrontation, tired of being hidden, wanting the status and wealth that came with being Mrs. Marcus Wellington. Besides, look at her. She's about to pop. What can she even do? The disrespect hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. Amber reached for the glass of wine Marcus had poured her earlier, taking a slow sip while maintaining eye contact with Sienna. This was the mistress's power move, her attempt to claim territory in a home that wasn't hers. She'd heard all about Sienna from Marcus, how she was gentle, quiet, always putting others first, how she'd been raised by a single mother who taught her to be accommodating and patient. Amber thought she knew exactly who she was dealing with. She thought wrong. Sienna finally spoke, her voice so calm it sent chills down Marcus's spine. "Get out of my house." 5 simple words, but they carried weight that neither Marcus nor Amber had anticipated. Sienna moved further into the room, her movements careful but deliberate, her hand never leaving her belly. She was protecting her unborn child even now, even in this moment of ultimate betrayal. "Both of you have 30 seconds to walk out that door before I make you regret ever stepping foot in here." Marcus actually laughed, a nervous sound that came from deep in his chest. His wife was 5'6", 8 months pregnant, and threatening him? Him, the man who'd built a tech empire from nothing, who had connections in every major city, who could ruin someone's life with a single phone call. He'd forgotten that money and power meant nothing when you pushed the wrong person too far. He'd forgotten that his wife wasn't just some trophy he'd married for her beauty and grace. He'd forgotten that before she became Mrs. Wellington, Sienna had secrets of her own. Or what? Amber challenged, standing up from the sofa with her wine glass still in hand. The mistress was enjoying this too much, feeding off Marcus's arrogance, convinced that 2 against 1 meant they'd already won. "You gonna waddle over here and fight me? Please. Marcus told me you can barely make it up the stairs without getting winded." That was the final straw. Sienna's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air of the penthouse, a tension that made the hair on Marcus's neck stand up. His wife moved toward the coffee table where Amber's designer purse sat, and in one fluid motion that was too fast for a pregnant woman, she grabbed it and threw it out the open balcony door into the Atlanta night. The purse sailed through the air and disappeared into darkness, 23 floors down to the street below. Amber shrieked, and Marcus froze, his brain trying to process what his eyes had just seen. That throw had power behind it, precision, control that came from training. What the hell kind of training did his wife have? Before anyone could react, Sienna was already moving toward Amber, and that's when Marcus realized he didn't know his wife at all. Drop a like if you want to see what happens when this mistress realizes she's messed with the wrong woman, because next chapter is going to blow your mind. Sienna's hand shot out faster than Marcus could process, gripping Amber's wrist before the mistress could even think about running. The pregnant woman's fingers wrapped around Amber's arm with a strength that made the other woman gasp, her wine glass tumbling from her free hand and staining the white carpet red like blood. Marcus stood paralyzed, watching his soft-spoken wife transform into someone he'd never seen before, someone whose eyes held a dangerous calm that made his heart race with something between fear and disbelief. This wasn't the woman who made him breakfast every morning, who rubbed his shoulders after long business meetings, who smiled politely at his mother even when the old woman criticized her cooking. This was someone else entirely, someone who had been hiding behind a mask of submission and patience for reasons he couldn't begin to understand. Before you think you know where the story is going, make sure that subscribe button is red because the secrets about to be revealed will change everything you thought you knew about this billionaire's pregnant wife. Sienna twisted Amber's arm in a movement so precise it looked choreographed, forcing the mistress down onto one knee with minimal effort despite her pregnant belly. The sound Amber made was somewhere between a shriek and a whimper, and it echoed through the penthouse like a warning bell that neither Marcus nor his mistress had been smart enough to hear before now. Marcus's mouth hung open as he watched his wife, 8 months pregnant with his child, control a grown woman with nothing but technique and pressure points he didn't know existed. Everything he thought he knew about Sienna was crumbling like sand between his fingers. "I said get out," Sienna repeated, her voice still eerily calm as Amber whimpered beneath her grip, trying to pull away but finding herself completely immobilized by a hold that seemed impossible for someone in her condition. Marcus finally snapped out of his shock and moved toward them, his protective instincts kicking in but not for his wife, for his mistress. That told Sienna everything she needed to know about where his loyalties truly lay, and it hardened something inside her that had been cracking for months, maybe years if she were being honest with herself. "Baby, let her go. What are you doing? You're pregnant. You're gonna hurt yourself." Marcus reached for Sienna's shoulder, his large hand extending toward her, but she shifted her weight, even with her belly prominent and throwing off her center of gravity, and somehow maneuvered out of his reach while maintaining her hold on Amber. It was like watching a dancer, graceful and controlled, except this dance could break bones if she wanted it to. Marcus had never seen anything like it, never imagined his wife capable of this kind of physical prowess, this kind of controlled violence that seemed at odds with everything he thought he knew about the woman he'd married 6 years ago. Where had she learned this? When had she learned this? During all those afternoons when he thought she was at prenatal yoga classes or shopping with her girlfriends at Lenox Mall, had she been training for this exact moment? The questions piled up in his mind like unpaid bills, demanding answers he wasn't sure he wanted to hear. "You have no idea who I am, Marcus. You never asked. You never cared enough to look past the surface, to see me as anything more than the quiet wife who stayed home and made your life comfortable." Sienna finally released Amber, who scrambled backward across the carpet like a crab, cradling her wrist and looking at Marcus with wide, terrified eyes that begged him to do something, to protect her the way he'd promised he would when he whispered sweet lies into her ear in expensive hotel rooms across Atlanta. But Marcus couldn't move, couldn't think past the realization that he'd married a stranger, or maybe he'd turned his wife into a stranger by pushing her too far, by taking her for granted for so long that she'd had no choice but to become someone else just to survive his neglect and betrayal. Sienna stood there in her silk robe, one hand supporting her lower back in that universal gesture of pregnant women everywhere, the other resting protectively on her belly where their son was kicking, She could feel him moving, tumbling around inside her as if he sensed his mother's distress and wanted to remind her that she wasn't alone, that she was fighting for both of them now. I gave up everything for you. My career, my independence, my identity, my sense of self-worth. I became whoever you needed me to be because I loved you, because I thought that's what marriage meant. Sacrifice and compromise and putting your partner's needs above your own. Her voice cracked slightly on those last words, the first real sign of emotion breaking through a controlled exterior, a glimpse of the hurt and disappointment she'd been carrying around like stones in her pockets. The truth came pouring out then, words that Sienna had been holding back for 2 years of suspicious credit card charges at jewelry stores she'd never seen the receipts from, perfume-stained collars on shirts she'd wash and press herself, and late-night business meetings that never appeared on his carefully maintained digital calendar or resulted in any new contracts for his tech company. Marcus flinched with every accusation like she was physically striking him, knowing they were all true, knowing he had no defense that would sound reasonable in this moment, no explanation that wouldn't make him sound like exactly what he was, a cheating husband who'd gotten too comfortable in his lies. Amber was trying to stand up now, using the sofa for support, her legs shaky and her designer dress wrinkled and twisted around her body, her makeup smeared from tears that had turned her false eyelashes into spidery black streaks down her cheeks. She looked nothing like the confident woman who'd waltzed into the penthouse an hour ago, swinging her hips and confident she was about to claim her prize, about to become the new Mrs. Wellington and inherit all the wealth and status that came with that title. Marcus, we need to leave right now. She's crazy, completely unhinged. She attacked me for no reason. Did you see what she did? Amber's voice was shrill now, desperate and climbing octaves. All her earlier bravado evaporated in the face of Sienna's unexpected strength and the cold reality that this wasn't going to play out the way she'd imagined it would. But Sienna turned her full attention to the mistress with a look that made Amber shrink back against the sofa cushions, pressing herself into the expensive leather like she could disappear into it if she tried hard enough. I'm going to tell you both something, and I want you to listen very carefully because I'm only going to say this once. Sienna's voice dropped lower, forcing them both to lean in slightly to hear her, a psychological tactic that put her firmly in control of the room despite being outnumbered and supposedly at a disadvantage because of her pregnancy. My mother raised me by herself in Oakland, California. We didn't have money for anything extra, no vacations or designer clothes or fancy schools. We didn't have a father around to protect us from the neighborhood dangers, from the men who thought a single woman and her daughter were easy targets. So when I was 6 years old, my mother took me to Master Chen's Wing Chun school in Chinatown, and she paid for my lessons by cleaning his school every night after her shift at the hospital ended. The revelation hung in the air like a bomb that had just been dropped into the middle of their expensive penthouse, and Marcus felt his legs weaken under him because suddenly everything made sense. The way she moved through their home with unconscious grace, the strength in her grip when she held his hand, the absolute calm in her eyes even when facing two people who conspired to betray and humiliate her in the worst possible way. I spent the next 15 years of my life learning Wing Chun, learning how to defend myself against men twice my size, learning discipline and control and how to turn my body into a weapon if I ever needed to. By the time I was 21, I'd earned my black sash and was teaching children's classes at Master Chen's school 3 nights a week while I put myself through college studying finance and business analytics. Sienna paused, letting that sink in, watching Marcus's face as he processed this information about a whole part of a life he'd never known existed. I stopped training when we got married 6 years ago because you asked me to, because you said you wanted a traditional wife who focused on our home and our future family instead of spending her evenings at some kung fu school in a rough part of town. So I gave it up for you, walked away from something that had been part of my identity for most of my life. But 3 months ago, when I found the first hotel receipt tucked into your jacket pocket with charges for champagne and room service for 2, I went back to Master Chen. Her hand moved unconsciously to her belly, protective and determined. I've been training every single afternoon while you were with her, while you were lying to me about conference calls and investor meetings. Even 8 months pregnant, even carrying your son and dealing with swollen ankles and back pain, I've been preparing myself for this exact moment because deep down I knew that eventually you'd push me too far, that one day you'd cross a line that even I couldn't forgive. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, to defend himself or apologize or maybe just beg. But no words came out because what could he possibly say that would fix any of this, that would undo months of betrayal and lies and taking his wife for granted? Comment below if you think Marcus deserved what's coming to him, because next chapter is going to show you exactly how a kung fu master handles a cheating billionaire husband and his disrespectful mistress. The silence that followed Sienna's revelation was deafening, broken only by the sound of Atlanta traffic 23 floors below and Amber's ragged breathing as she clutched her wrist like it might fall off. Marcus stared at his wife with a mixture of shock, fear, and something that might have been respect if he wasn't so terrified of what she might do next. He'd spent 6 years thinking he knew everything about Sienna, her favorite foods, her sleep schedule, the way she liked her coffee with 2 sugars and a splash of cream. But he'd never bothered to ask about her past, about the woman she was before she became his wife. If you're not subscribed yet, hit that button now, because what happens in this chapter will have you questioning everything you thought you knew about love, loyalty, and consequences. Sienna moved away from them both, walking slowly toward the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city, her reflection ghostly in the glass against the backdrop of twinkling lights. She looked small standing there, her pregnant belly silhouetted against the urban landscape. But Marcus had learned in the last 10 minutes that size meant nothing when it came to his wife. "I want both of you out of my house within the hour," she said without turning around, her voice steady and final as a judge delivering a verdict. "Marcus, you can pack a bag with whatever you need for a few days. Everything else stays here until my lawyer contacts you in the morning. And Amber, if you're still in this building in 5 minutes, I'm calling security and telling them you broke in." Amber's mouth dropped open in outrage, her pain momentarily forgotten in the face of this dismissal. "Broke in? Marcus brought me here. Tell her, baby, tell her that you invited me, that we've been planning this, that you are finally going to tell her about us tonight." The mistress was standing now, her voice getting louder and more desperate with each word, reaching for Marcus's arm like he was a life raft in stormy seas. But Marcus pulled away from her touch, his eyes still fixed on his wife's back, on the way her shoulders were set with determination he'd never seen before. Something shifted in that moment, some calculation running through his billionaire brain about assets and reputation, and what a divorce might cost him, especially if Sienna had proof of his affairs. "Amber, maybe you should go," he said quietly, and the betrayal on the mistress's face would have been comical if the situation wasn't so devastating. Here was a woman who'd spent months believing she was special, believing Marcus would choose her over his wife, and now she was being discarded like trash the moment things got complicated. "What?" "No. Marcus, you promised me. You said once the baby was born you were going to leave her, that we'd be together, that you'd buy me that condo in Buckhead." Amber's voice cracked with emotion, with a realization that she'd been played just as badly as Sienna had, just in a different way. Marcus had made promises to both women, lies crafted specifically to keep each of them satisfied while he enjoyed the benefits of having his cake and eating it too. "Get out, Amber," Marcus said more firmly this time, his CEO voice coming through, the tone he used when firing employees or shutting down unprofitable ventures. Just like that, Amber meant nothing to him, was nothing more than a liability that needed to be managed and removed from the situation before she could cause more damage to his reputation or his bank account. The mistress looked between Marcus and Sienna, finally understanding that she'd lost, that whatever game she thought she was playing had been rigged against her from the start. She grabbed her phone from where it had fallen on the carpet, her movements jerky and uncoordinated as tears streamed down her face. "You're both crazy," she spat, backing toward the door like a wounded animal. "Marcus, you're a lying piece of trash, and Sienna, you can have him because it's not worth fighting over anyway. I hope you both rot in this fancy prison you call a home." The insults were weak, the desperate last words of someone who knew they'd been beaten, who'd gambled everything on a man who wasn't capable of loyalty to anyone but himself. Amber fumbled with the door handle, finally getting it open, and then she was gone, her expensive heels clicking rapidly down the hallway toward the elevators. The sound faded until there was nothing left but Marcus and Sienna alone in their penthouse, surrounded by the wreckage of their marriage and the weight of words that could never be taken back. Sienna finally turned from the window, and Marcus saw that her eyes were dry even though her hand trembled slightly where it rested on her belly. She wasn't crying, hadn't shed a single tear through this entire confrontation, and that scared him more than anything else had tonight. The Sienna he thought he knew would have been sobbing by now, would have been begging him to explain, to make it make sense, to promise he'd change. But this woman standing before him looked like she'd already moved past grief into something colder and more permanent. "I need you to understand something, Marcus," she said, walking slowly back toward him, each step measured and deliberate. "I'm not throwing you out because I'm angry, though I am. I'm not doing this because I want revenge, though you deserve it. I'm doing this because our son deserves better than to grow up watching his father disrespect his mother. He deserves to see what real strength looks like, what real love looks like, even if that means seeing from one parent instead of two." Her words hit Marcus like physical blows, each one stripping away another layer of his justifications and excuses. "You thought I was weak because I was kind. You thought I was stupid because I trusted you. You thought being pregnant made me helpless. But the only weak person in this room is you, Marcus. You're the one who couldn't handle commitment, who couldn't resist temptation, who couldn't appreciate what he had until it was walking out the door." Marcus felt something crack inside his chest, something that might have been his heart or might have been his ego. He couldn't tell the difference anymore. "Sienna, please, let me explain. Amber doesn't mean anything to me. It was just physical, just a stupid mistake that went on too long. You're my wife, the mother of my child. Everything I built for us, for our family." The words tumbled out at him desperately, a last-ditch effort to salvage something from this disaster. But even as he spoke them, he could hear how hollow they sounded, how many times men had said these exact same words to women they betrayed, how little they meant when actions had already spoken volumes louder than promises ever could. Sienna shook her head slowly, almost sadly, like she was disappointed but not surprised by his response. "You built an empire, Marcus, but you forgot to build a marriage. You made billions, but you couldn't invest 5 minutes of honesty into our relationship. And now you're standing here trying to explain away 2 years of lies like they were nothing more than a minor accounting error." She moved past him toward their bedroom, and he followed her like a lost puppy, watching as she pulled a suitcase from the closet and began throwing his clothes into it without bothering to fold them. $1,000 suits and designer shoes got tossed in carelessly, and Marcus wanted to protest but couldn't find the words. "You have until midnight to be gone. After that, I'm changing the locks and having my lawyer file a restraining order if necessary. Don't test me on this, Marcus. Don't make me show you what else Master Chen taught me besides how to control someone with pressure points." The threat hung in the air, and Marcus believed every word because he'd already seen what his pregnant wife was capable of when pushed too far. Share this video if you think Sienna's the strongest woman you've ever seen, because next chapter is going to show you the real cost of betrayal when a billionaire realizes he's lost everything that actually mattered. 3 days had passed since Marcus walked out of the penthouse with his hastily packed suitcase, and the silence in the apartment felt louder than any argument they'd ever had. Sienna sat in the nursery she'd spent months decorating, surrounded by pale blue walls and stuffed animals that would soon belong to a son who might never know his father as anything more than a weekend visitor. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from Marcus, apologies, explanations, promises to change, threats about lawyers and custody battles, but she'd stopped reading them after the first dozen. If you're ready to see how a woman takes back her power in her life, smash that like button because this chapter is going to show you what real revenge looks like when you stop playing defense and start playing offense. Sienna's hand moved across her belly, feeling her son kick and roll, reminding her why she'd found the strength to stand up for herself in the first place. She'd scheduled an appointment with Diane Richardson, the best divorce attorney in Atlanta, a black woman who'd built her reputation, destroying powerful men who thought their money could buy them out of accountability. The meeting was in 2 hours, and Sienna had spent the past 3 days gathering evidence, bank statements showing unexplained charges, hotel receipts she'd found hidden in Marcus's office, text messages she recovered from his old iPad that he thought he'd wiped clean. She'd also made some calls to people Marcus had underestimated just like he'd underestimated her. People who had information that could destroy everything he'd built if it ever went public. The doorbell rang, pulling Sienna from her thoughts, and she moved carefully to the intercom, her body heavy with pregnancy but her mind sharp and focused on what needed to happen next. "Mrs. Wellington, there's a Jasmine Cole here to see you," the building concierge announced, and Sienna smiled for the first time in days because Jasmine was right on time. She buzzed her best friend up, and within minutes Jasmine was walking through the door carrying Chinese takeout and wearing an expression that said she was ready for war. Jasmine Cole had been Sienna's roommate in college, her maid of honor at the wedding, and the one person who'd never pretended to like Marcus even when Sienna was head over heels in love with him. "Girl, I brought extra egg rolls because I know you're eating for two, and I brought something else too," Jasmine said, setting the food down on the kitchen counter and pulling out her laptop. "Remember how I told you my cousin Terrence works in IT? Well, turns out Marcus's company hired his firm to manage their network security about 6 months ago. And Terrence, being the petty king that he is, happened to notice some interesting activity on Marcus's work computer." Jasmine's grin was wicked as she opened her laptop and turned it towards Sienna, showing her a detailed log of every website Marcus had visited, every email he'd sent from his company account, every reservation he'd made using the corporate credit card that was supposed to be for business expenses only. The evidence was damning, showing a pattern of misuse of company funds that could get Marcus in serious trouble not just with his wife, but with his board of directors and possibly even with federal investigators if anyone decided to look closely enough at his creative accounting. Sienna studied the screen, her analytical mind from her finance career kicking into gear as she recognized what she was looking at. Grounds not just for divorce, but for complete dismantling of the empire Marcus had built by cutting corners and bending rules. "Jasmine, this is more than just a fair evidence. This shows he's been using company money to fund his lifestyle with Amber. Hotels charged to business accounts, jewelry purchases listed as client gifts, even a weekend trip to Miami that he told me was a tech conference but was actually just him and her on South Beach." The implications were staggering, and Sienna felt a cold satisfaction spreading through her chest like ice water, numbing the pain of betrayal and replacing it with something more useful: strategic planning. Marcus had always been so careful to keep his personal and professional lives separate, to maintain the image of a brilliant entrepreneur who'd built his tech company through innovation and hard work. But if Sienna could prove he'd been stealing from his own company, funneling money meant for operations and development into his extramarital activities, his investors would turn on him faster than Amber had run from the penthouse. Can Terrence testify to this if we need him to? Would he be willing to provide this information to my attorney? Sienna asked, already thinking 3 moves ahead like Master Chen had taught her, anticipating Marcus's defenses and cutting them off before he could even mount them. Jasmine nodded enthusiastically, pulling out her phone to text her cousin right there in the kitchen while Sienna opened containers of lo mein and orange chicken, suddenly hungrier than she'd been in days now that she had a real plan forming in her mind. "Terrence says he's been waiting for someone to ask him about Marcus's shady activity. Apparently your husband isn't very popular with the people who actually keep his company running," Jasmine reported, reading from her phone while stealing a spring roll from Sienna's plate. There's also some interesting chatter about how Marcus has been taking credit for code and innovations that were actually developed by his senior engineers, particularly his lead developer, a brother named Donnell Matthews who's been with the company since the beginning. Word is Donnell has been thinking about leaving and taking half the development team with him because Marcus keeps promising equity and promotions that never materialize while he buys luxury cars and expensive jewelry for his mistress. The pieces were falling into place, and Sienna could see the full picture now. Marcus wasn't just a cheating husband. He was a failing businessman who'd been propped up by talented people he'd exploited and undercompensated while taking all the glory and most of the profits for himself. She pulled out her own phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found Donnell Matthews' number, saved from a company holiday party 2 years ago where the quiet developer had spent 20 minutes talking to her about coding languages and artificial intelligence while Marcus glad-handed investors and ignored both of them. "Jasmine, I need you to reach out to Donnell for me. Tell him I want to meet with him privately, somewhere Marcus won't know about. Tell him I'm prepared to offer him something Marcus never would, a fair deal and the respect he deserves. Sienna's mind was working overtime now, seeing opportunities where before she'd only seen devastation, recognizing that Marcus's betrayal had actually freed her to stop protecting him and start protecting herself and her son's future. The plan that formed over the next hour as Sienna and Jasmine ate Chinese food and plotted strategy was ruthless in its efficiency and devastating in its potential impact on Marcus's life. Sienna would meet with a divorce attorney and present not just evidence of adultery, but evidence of corporate malfeasance and misuse of company funds. She would simultaneously reach out to Marcus's key employees and offer them a better opportunity. She still had connections in the finance world, still had her own money from before the marriage that she'd kept in a separate account Marcus didn't know about, money her mother had insisted she never combine with her husband's just in case. With that capital and the right team, she could potentially start a competing company, or at the very least provide Marcus's best people with the resources to leave and start their own venture, gutting his workforce right when he needed them most. You know he's going to lose his mind when he finds out you're not just divorcing him, but destroying his business too, Jasmine said, watching her friend with something like her, because this wasn't the soft-spoken Sienna who'd let Marcus walk all over her for years. This was someone new. Someone who'd finally remembered who she was before she tried to shrink herself to fit into Marcus's vision of a perfect wife. Sienna smiled, an expression that didn't quite reach her eyes, cold and calculating in a way that would have terrified Marcus if he could have seen it. Good. I want him to lose his mind. I want him to feel a fraction of what I felt when I realized the man I loved, the father of my child, valued me so little that he brought his mistress into our home. She stood up slowly, supporting her belly as she moved to the window overlooking Atlanta, the same window where she'd stood 3 nights ago and changed the course of her life. Marcus thought being a billionaire made him untouchable. He is about to learn that money can't save you from the consequences of underestimating a woman who has nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Drop a comment if you think Marcus deserves everything that's coming to him, because next chapter is going to show you exactly what happens when a kung fu master billionaire wife stops defending and starts attacking. Marcus sat in his corner office on the 20th floor of Wellington Tech headquarters, staring at the email that had just landed in his inbox like a bomb dropped from a clear sky. The subject line read, "Notice of Dissolution of Marriage and Asset Freeze," and it came from Diane Richardson's law firm, the same attorney who'd taken down 3 Fortune 500 executives in the past 2 years alone. His hands trembled as he opened the attachment, scanning through pages of legal language that basically said his wife wasn't just divorcing him. She was coming for everything he owned, everything he'd built, everything he thought was untouchable because it was in his name and under his control. Make sure you're subscribed, because what happens when Marcus realizes he's been outmaneuvered by the wife he thought was weak is going to blow your mind and restore your faith in karma. The document detailed not just the affair with Amber, but included bank statements, hotel receipts, and corporate credit card records that showed a pattern of misuse of company funds spanning back almost 2 years. Diane Richardson had somehow gotten access to information that should have been protected by layers of corporate security and privacy protocols. Information that could destroy Marcus not just personally but professionally. His phone started ringing before he could finish reading, and he saw his board chairman's name flashing on the screen, which meant someone had already leaked this to the board of directors, which meant his problems were multiplying faster than he could contain them. Marcus's mind raced through possibilities of who could have betrayed him, who had access to this level of detailed financial information, and then it hit him like a physical blow. Sienna's best friend Jasmine had a cousin in IT who worked for the security firm they'd hired 6 months ago. "Marcus, we need to talk right now." James Bradford's voice came through the speaker, the board chairman sounding more angry than Marcus had ever heard him in their 10-year relationship. "I just got a very interesting email from an attorney representing your wife, and she's threatening to go public with evidence that you've been using company resources to fund an extramarital affair. Do you have any idea what this could do to our stock price, to our investor relationships, to the deals we're trying to close right now?" The questions came rapid fire, each one a nail in the coffin of Marcus's carefully constructed image as a brilliant entrepreneur who had his life together both personally and professionally. Marcus tried to formulate a response, tried to find the words that would make this sound less damaging than it was, but his mouth felt dry and his usually sharp mind was sluggish with panic. "James, I can explain all of this. Those charges were mostly legitimate business expenses that just happened to coincide with personal travel. And the divorce, that's just my wife being emotional because of the pregnancy hormones. You know how women can get when they're expecting. Everything gets blown out of proportion. The excuse sounded weak even to his own ears, a desperate attempt to downplay something that couldn't be downplayed, and he could hear James's sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, the kind of sound people make when they realize they've been lied to and are deciding how to respond. Don't insult my intelligence, Marcus, and definitely don't insult your wife. I've met Sienna at company events, and she's one of the smartest, most composed women I've ever encountered. If she's coming after you with this level of evidence and this caliber of attorney, it's because you gave her no choice and she has every receipt to back up her claims. The meeting that followed 2 hours later in the Wellington Tech boardroom was brutal in its efficiency and devastating in its outcome for Marcus. He sat at the head of the conference table where he presided over countless strategy sessions and product launches, but this time he wasn't in control. He was being interrogated by the very people he'd thought were his allies and supporters. James Bradford had brought in the company's outside counsel, a stern woman named Patricia Chen, who reviewed the evidence Diane Richardson had provided with the cold precision of a surgeon identifying a tumor. Mr. Wellington, these records show over $300,000 in questionable charges over the past 18 months. Hotels, restaurants, jewelry, travel, all charged to corporate accounts and categorized as client entertainment or business development expenses. However, when cross-referenced with your actual client meetings and company travel logs, there's virtually no overlap. These appear to be entirely personal expenses fraudulently billed to the company. Patricia's voice was neutral, but her words were damning, laying out a case that could potentially result in criminal charges if the board decided to pursue them. Marcus felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning, felt his carefully tailored suit suddenly feeling too tight like it was trying to strangle him. Furthermore, your employment contract specifically prohibits the use of company resources for personal benefit, and the company's ethics policy that you yourself signed off on 3 years ago has a zero-tolerance clause for this type of behavior. The board has already discussed this matter in executive session before this meeting, and I'm afraid we've reached a unanimous decision. James Bradford took over then, his expression a mixture of disappointment and anger that cut through Marcus worse than any legal language could have. Marcus, effective immediately, you're being placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation into these allegations. You will surrender your company credit cards, your building access, and your company-issued devices by end of business today. If the investigation confirms what we're seeing in these preliminary documents, we'll have no choice but to terminate your employment and potentially pursue legal action to recover the misappropriated funds. The words hit Marcus like a physical assault, each one stripping away another layer of the identity he'd built for himself over the past decade. Without Wellington Tech, without his title as CEO and founder, who was he? Just another black man from the south side of Chicago who'd gotten lucky with a good idea in some venture capital, who'd let success go to his head and forgotten where he came from and what mattered. "You can't do this," Marcus said, his voice rising with desperation that he couldn't control anymore, the alpha male persona cracking to reveal the frightened man underneath who was watching his entire world crumble in real time. "I built this company from nothing. I'm the vision. I'm the face. I'm the reason investors believed in us in the first place. Without me, Wellington Tech is just another generic software company competing with 1,000 others." But even as he said it, Marcus knew it wasn't true. Knew that the real talent behind Wellington Tech's success sat in the development labs 3 floors down. People like Donnell Matthews who'd written the core code that made their flagship product revolutionary. People whose names never appeared in the tech press articles that celebrated Marcus as a genius innovator. "Actually, Marcus, that's where you're wrong," James Bradford said, and there was something in his tone that made Marcus's blood run cold. "We've already spoken with your senior development team, and they've assured us that operations can continue seamlessly during your absence. In fact, several of them have expressed relief at the idea of leadership changes that might finally give them the recognition and compensation they deserve for their contributions to this company's success." The betrayal was complete. Not just his wife, not just his board, But even his own employees had turned against him, had been waiting for an opportunity to push him out of the empire he thought he'd built, but had actually been carried by people he'd taken for granted and undervalued. Marcus left the Wellington Tech building an hour later, security escorting him to his office to pack his personal belongings into a cardboard box like he was a common employee being fired for stealing from petty cash. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number, and when he opened it, he saw a photo that made his knees weak. It was Sienna, sitting in what looked like a conference room with Donnell Matthews and 3 other senior developers from his company, all of them smiling at the camera like they were celebrating something. The message below the photo read, "Your employees send their regards. They are very excited about their new opportunities." Marcus leaned against the wall of the elevator as it descended, the box of his personal effects feeling heavier than it should, containing framed photos and awards that now seemed meaningless in light of everything he lost. His billionaire status was about to take a serious hit once the divorce proceedings revealed his assets and the company investigation uncovered the full extent of his financial misconduct. The penthouse he could no longer enter, the company he'd been forced out of, the reputation he'd spent years building, all of it was crumbling because he'd underestimated his pregnant wife and thought her kindness was weakness. Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled to Sienna's number, his thumb hovering over the call button, wanting to beg for mercy or understanding, or at least a chance to explain himself one more time. But before he could press it, another message came through, this time from Diane Richardson's office with a court date for the preliminary divorce hearing and a reminder that any attempt to contact Sienna directly would be considered a violation of the communication restrictions outlined in the legal documents. Marcus was truly alone now, cut off from everyone and everything that had made him feel important and powerful, left with nothing but the consequences of his own choices and the devastating realization that he destroyed the one thing that had actually mattered, his family. Comment below if you believe in karma and want to see how Sienna builds her new life, because next chapter is going to show you the power of a woman who refused to stay broken and the sweet justice of a happy ending earned through strength and dignity. 6 months later, Sienna stood in the nursery of her new townhouse in the upscale Virginia Highland neighborhood, rocking her 3-month-old son Marcus Jr. She kept the name despite everything because her son deserved his own identity separate from his father's mistakes, and watching the sunrise paint the sky in shade of orange and pink through the window. The townhouse was smaller than the penthouse, but it felt more like home than that cold marble palace ever had, filled with warmth and laughter from the new life she'd built from the ashes of her marriage. Her son cooed softly against her shoulder, his tiny fist gripping her finger with surprising strength, and Sienna felt her heart swell with a love so fierce it sometimes took her breath away. If you've been following this journey from the beginning, hit that like button and subscribe because this final chapter is going to show you that happy endings aren't about revenge. They're about reclaiming your power and building something better than what you lost. The divorce had been finalized 2 months ago with a settlement that left Marcus with significantly less than he'd started with, but more than he deserved considering his behavior. Sienna had walked away with full custody of their son, the townhouse, a substantial monthly child support payment, and half of Marcus's liquid assets before the company investigation had frozen the rest. But more importantly, she'd walked away with her dignity intact and a renewed sense of purpose that had been missing from her life for years while she played the role of submissive billionaire wife. The business venture she'd started with Donnell Matthews and the other developers who'd left Wellington Tech was already showing promise, a software company called Phoenix Solutions that specialized in ethical AI development and actually valued its employees as partners rather than expendable resources. Sienna had invested her divorce settlement and her own pre-marriage savings into the company, using her financial analysis skills to structure deals and secure investors who believed in their vision of technology that served humanity rather than just generating profits. Donnell had insisted she take the title of CFO despite her protest that she'd been out of the finance world for 6 years, telling her that her strategic thinking during the divorce proceedings had proven she was exactly the kind of leader they needed to build something that would last. The company was still small, operating out of a modest office space in Midtown, but they'd already secured 2 major contracts and were in talks with investors who were impressed by their ethical approach and the talent of their development team. Sienna had also returned to training at Master Chen's Wing Chun School, this time bringing Marcus Jr. with her in a carrier while she worked through forms and techniques with the same dedication she'd had as a teenager. Master Chen, now in his 70s, had welcomed her back with a quiet wisdom that came from decades of teaching students that real strength came from discipline and self-knowledge rather than domination and control. "You have learned the most important lesson," he'd told her during her first session back after giving birth. "That Kung Fu is not about fighting others, but about knowing yourself well enough to stand firm when the world tries to push you down." His words had stayed with her, reminding her that everything she'd been through had made her stronger, not weaker, had revealed capabilities she'd forgotten she possessed during the years when she tried to make herself smaller to fit into Marcus's world. Jasmine had moved into the spare bedroom of the townhouse temporarily, helping with the baby during those first exhausting weeks of new motherhood when Sienna had felt overwhelmed by the combination of caring for an infant, launching a business, and processing the emotional trauma of her marriage collapse. The two women had fallen into an easy rhythm of shared responsibilities and late-night conversations over tea while Marcus Jr. slept in his crib, talking about everything from diaper brands to the deeper questions about identity and self-worth that Sienna was still working through with her therapist. "You know what I'm most proud of?" Jasmine had said one night about a month after the baby was born, holding Marcus Jr. while Sienna ate leftover pizza with the desperate hunger of a breastfeeding mother. "It's not that you destroyed Marcus's empire or got a great divorce settlement, or even that you started a successful company. It's that you never lost yourself in the anger. You could have become bitter and vengeful, could have let what he did to you poison your whole outlook on life and love. But instead, you just became more yourself, more focused, more powerful, more clear about what matters." The observation had made Sienna cry, those postpartum hormones making her emotional in ways she couldn't always control. But they were good tears, cleansing tears that washed away some of the residual hurt she'd been carrying. She was healing, slowly but surely, learning to trust herself again and to see her worth as something intrinsic rather than something derived from being someone's wife or meeting someone else's expectations of who she should be. The journey wasn't easy, and there were still hard days when she wondered if she'd done the right thing, if she should have tried harder to save her marriage, if Marcus Jr. would resent her someday for depriving him of a two-parent household. But then she'd look at her son's face and remember that she was teaching him the most important lesson she could, that people who love you should treat you with respect and dignity, and that walking away from mistreatment wasn't failure but courage. Marcus had been granted supervised visitation rights every other weekend, sessions that took place at a family center where a social worker monitored his interactions with Marcus Jr. to ensure the baby's safety and well-being. Sienna had pushed for the supervision after Marcus had shown up drunk to what was supposed to be his first solo visit, his life having spiraled significantly in the months since the divorce as he struggled to rebuild his reputation and career after being forced out of Wellington Tech. The company had ultimately decided not to press criminal charges in exchange for Marcus's agreement to repay the misappropriated funds and sign away his remaining equity stake, a deal that left him financially stable but far from the billionaire status he'd once enjoyed. He'd tried to start a consulting business but found that his name was now associated with scandal rather than success, that the tech industry had a long memory for ethical violations and a short tolerance for people who'd proven themselves untrustworthy. Sienna felt a complicated mixture of emotions when she dropped Marcus Jr. off for these visits. Pity for how far Marcus had fallen, anger at the choices that had led them here, and sadness for the family they could have been if he'd just appreciated what he had before he lost it. But she no longer felt responsible for his happiness or his recovery, had learned through therapy and hard experience that everyone had to face the consequences of their own choices, and that trying to save someone from themselves was a recipe for losing yourself in the process. She was cordial during the handoffs, professional in her communications about their son's needs and schedules, but the warm love she'd once felt for Marcus had been replaced by a cool indifference that was somehow more final than anger or hatred ever could have been. He'd become simply her son's father, a person she had to coordinate with for the next 18 years, but no longer someone who had any claim on her heart or her future. The surprise that changed everything came on a Tuesday afternoon in late spring when Sienna was working from home, Marcus Jr. napping peacefully in his crib while she reviewed financial projections for Phoenix Solutions on her laptop. The doorbell rang, and she found a courier with a thick manila envelope addressed to her, and when she opened it, she discovered documents related to Wellington Tech's bankruptcy filing and liquidation proceedings. Marcus's former company had collapsed completely in the 6 months since the scandal. Unable to survive the loss of its key developers and the damage to its reputation, once news of Marcus's misconduct had leaked to the press. But what made Sienna's breath catch was the attached letter from a bankruptcy trustee explaining that as part of the asset distribution, she was being offered first right of refusal to purchase Wellington Tech's intellectual property and remaining assets at a significantly reduced price because of her status as a major creditor through the child support and settlement agreements. The irony was almost poetic. She could buy the company that Marcus had built and lost, could take the empire he'd sacrificed his marriage to maintain and transform it into something better, something that aligned with her values and gave opportunities to people who'd been overlooked and undervalued by Marcus's leadership. Sienna sat at her kitchen table reading through the documents multiple times, her mind already racing through possibilities and calculations, seeing how Phoenix Solutions could absorb Wellington Tech's assets and client base to become a major player in the Atlanta tech scene almost overnight. She called Donnell immediately, and within hours her entire leadership team was gathered around her dining room table, eating takeout and debating the merits and risks of this unexpected opportunity that felt like the universe offering her a chance to complete the circle, to take something broken and make it whole again. The decision they reached after 3 hours of intense discussion was unanimous. They would make an offer, would take the risk, would bet on themselves and the vision they'd been building together for the past 6 months. And if you've made it this far in this story, drop a comment telling us what you would do in Sienna's situation. And make sure you're subscribed because stories like this remind us that strength comes in many forms and happy endings are something you build, not something you wait for someone else to give you.